OTC. Hey, that's cool.
You got a podcast?
Well, I didn't know that.
That's cool.
Now you do.
Welcome to OTC's very own That's Cool podcast. The podcast we make right here at OTC, getting to know all the great people that work here. We used to be able to say that this was OTC's only podcast. However, we have a great new addition. Jeffrey Johnson is now, he is a instructor over at Electronic Media Production. He has started his own podcast with his family called The Rock Farm. It's amazing. He's had guests such as Phil Forrester, who teaches music here on campus. It is fantastic. If you get a chance to listen to it, you can find it at therockfarm.libsyn.com. And we would love for you to support him, and we would love to support you in starting your own podcast. So if that's something you're interested in, make sure to get a hold of us as we continue to build our podcast community here at OTC. I, of course, am Jared Durden, and with me, as always,
is Andrew Crocker. I am so glad that you gave a shout out to Mr. Johnson.
Have you heard it?
I have heard both episodes, and first of all, as you can expect from somebody in his position, the sound quality is fantastic. His production preparation is fantastic. He himself, as you know, is a great guy. He was instrumental in helping us set up this podcast. So, yeah, absolutely. First of all, let me just clarify what Jared said. If you need to get a podcast set up, he's the guy you talk to. But if you want to get a shout out and get a little love, we're definitely the people you talk to, because any OTC podcast, I love the behind the scenes stuff. Jared, how you doing?
I'm great.
Are you feeling, now that you're on campus? I know you're not on campus every day. Are you really just on campus for the podcast?
No, I'm teaching a CETA section, so I'm here Monday through Thursday.
Is the campus feeling safe?
Campus is safe. In the summer, we have such an increase in online that we are just not seeing as many students on campus, which at this time is functional, right? And so it's felt safe. I, of course, feel safer. I've been vaccinated and have been encouraging students and reminding them of how important that is as well. Which reminds me, we talked last time about the Netflix documentary Behind the Curve.
Yes.
And so in this week's
Netflix documentary about flat earthers.
About flat earthers,
yes.
Right? So in this week's I Messed Up, I need to refer back to, we talked about a physicist who discussed how important it was to be good ambassadors of science, and how rhetoric can affect people's mistrust in science. And so the physicist that spoke, he's from Cal State. His name's Lamar Glover. He does his work on dismantling the scientific superiority complex. So check out Lamar's work. Check out the Netflix documentary Behind the Curve. Fascinating.
Yes. And really relevant to the conversation. A really great conversation that I hope we have again sometime with Daniel Oganyemi. That was a really,
Absolutely. From episode 3. If you're keeping track, this is episode 4.
It is, matter of fact, yeah. This is our
right.
4th anniversary. Would you remember what the anniversary? Each anniversary has a nickname. Do you know what the 4th anniversary is?
I don't. I know in wedding anniversaries, it's flowers and fruit.
Well, there you go. That's what I meant. Yeah, flowers and fruit. Okay.
Yeah,
I should have brought flowers and or fruit. I apologize. We are both flowerless and fruitless.
I got Carly a, what is that called? A dragon fruit and this giant melon thing that was like... Oh, man, I can't remember. So this is going to be in next week's I Messed Up.
Okay.
I got a bunch of exotic fruits that
okay.
I thought were interesting.
A dragon fruit.
Dragon fruit. It's really pretty. It's pretty tasty. It's kind of like a kiwi without as much kick.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It might just not have been as ripe enough.
All right.
So anyways, we're here today with a brand new guest. And this was a question that that you had brought up, Andrew, and you suggested, of course, we bring Matthew Simpson, who is our Chief Research and Government Affairs Officer here at OTC. And what is the question that that you had the topic that you were interested
Well,
in.
I had, back when we were kind of kicking ideas around, I'm always jutting ideas to you. And the idea that fascinated me recently, since we work at a community college, we currently have a president married to a community college instructor, by the way, president of the United States. That's the kind of president I'm talking about here. And he has unveiled plans for potentially achieving tuition-free community college. I wanted to talk about what on earth that would even look like, whether that's wise, although, obviously we're just looking for information more than we are judgments. And so I was like, if I could find one person on campus, very top of my list would be Mr. Matt Simpson. First of all, say, hey, sir.
Hey, well, thank you guys for having me. I'm really excited to join you.
And
Thank
we
you for
buried the
coming.
lead a bit because you are, in fact, the chief. Can you give us just a snippet? What is that position, the chief research officer?
So it's kind of something different every day, but on the research side, the big part is doing all the government compliance reports. There are a ton of those, and a lot of research offices, kind of that's all they're able to do. We're fortunate at OTC that we also take a very data-driven approach to decisions. So we don't only have to do the required stuff, we also get to do research on what serves our students best in the classroom and the other supports we provide, what serves our community best. And that research is then used by decision makers to make sure that we're doing the best thing possible for our students and for our community. So there are different questions every day, but we love getting to answer them. On the governmental affairs side, just working with our community partners, working with the different levels of state government that we interact with, and making sure that we're presenting OTC's story and doing our best to get the resources to serve our students.
We have been so gifted the first 4 episodes to bring in people who are all fascinating in their own rights for their own reasons. What makes you interesting, in addition to all I've seen firsthand the crazy amount of research you have to conduct. But on top of that, you also are the founder of 5 Pound Apparel, which many of our coworkers. I know many of our coworkers didn't know that.
I have several of your T-shirts.
I'm very glad. I always love seeing the T-shirts around town.
Yeah.
I've got a whole, too many probably if you ask my wife, but I've got a whole drawer in my cabinet of them. Thank you. Yeah. So I co-founded, 5 Pound Apparel with, that's right. With my brother, Brian. We've sold that several years back. He's moved on. He's doing the big blanket company now. But that was, getting to be a part of, it was really his thing, but getting to be a part of it and, see the process of starting a business and see what impact it can make on the community and the lasting impact and people still wearing the shirts and the charities we're able to help. That's a pretty rewarding experience.
And which transitions us perfectly into the other thing that's many things interesting about you. But for me specifically, you also serve on the city council. You are now in your 2nd term. Was your first term a full term?
So yeah, it's a more complicated path on mine than some others, but I was appointed to city council to fill a vacancy back in the spring of 2018, and then was the way appointments work. You then face election for the remainder of your first term. So then I was elected in April 2019 for the remainder of my first term, and then reelected again in April 2021 this year for my 2nd term or first full term, however you want to.
Okay, and I mean, Matt, you and I are really going to have to try here not to derail this thing because you and I could.
We could get into the weeds on
there's
that
this
easily.
Great mixture though in terms of a great guest because on my side of the fence, the data-driven research, speaking my language, on your side of the fence, the political contributions, and so I think we might both need to be careful about not derailing.
Oh, it could be, but might have to have this might have to be a trilogy. We have we there for anybody who doesn't know, City Council for Springfield, Missouri has 9 seats. The first seat is, of course, the mayor representing the entire city. 4 of those seats are what we call general seats. All 4 of those seats each represent the entire city, and then the last 4 seats split Springfield up into fourths. Which of those fourths do you represent, sir?
So I am Zone 4, which is southeast Springfield. For the most part, that's east of Campbell, south of Sunshine. Do pick up some around the Phelps Grove Park area, north of Sunshine as well. And so that balance of representation of you've got people who primarily are able to take the citywide perspective, and you've got people like me who are able to work more closely with specific areas and represent not only the citywide perspective but the concerns of the specific part of town. I think provides a pretty good balance. The other thing for me is that none of us signed up to council expecting to having to deal with the global pandemic. Nobody, I think, any of us in any area expected to have to deal with that. But Zone 4 also contains the city's major hospitals. We've got Cox, we have Mercy, we have Burrell located there, and so that has been a particularly important perspective to represent throughout this pandemic as we're trying to support their response and their work to save lives.
What verb would you use? Do you enjoy working on city council? I don't know if that's the appropriate verb to use right now, given the challenges we face as a community.
Yeah, it's. I would definitely say enjoy is not the right verb for since last March, but it's still. As difficult as it is, and as negative as it is, and as it can get in terms of the rhetoric, and as overwhelming as it can get with some of these issues, I think rewarding is maybe the better verb to use still, because we still do have a chance, despite all that stuff, we still do have a chance to make a difference and make positive impacts for our community. And we don't get to choose the circumstances we face, but being in that position, we can have a say in how we respond to them. And as long as there's still that chance to help people, then it's still rewarding no matter how hard it gets.
Councilman Simpson, I was fortunate enough to interview Kendra Findley. I'm going to get her position wrong, but she's head of epidemiology and at Greene County Health Office. And she had said that Greene County is one of the 10 worst counties in America in terms of COVID rates right now. We're in the biggest city in Greene County. You're a city council member for it. What's our problem?
The issue at this point is vaccination rates. The evidence is very clear that vaccines are the best way to protect not only yourself, but reaching adequate community vaccination levels is the way to protect the community and avoid us having to go through these spikes every time that there is a variant. We heartbreakingly kind of are on the tip of the spear with the Delta variant, with it coming into our region and spreading across our region, and what we're seeing right now is it's kind of spreading further across the state, and you're going to see communities with similar lower vaccination levels, unfortunately, I think, go through the same thing that we're going through. We just happen to be the region that kind of went through it first. And that's that it's preventable. That's the part that
heartbreaking
is heartbreaking, because we don't have to be going through this. And I hope that the takeaway from people will be that you don't want to go through this yourself. If you don't want our community to go through this again, when we move through the Greek alphabet. The way to prevent that is getting the vaccination.
Oh, is that why it's called the Delta variation? What variant is
variant,
because
yeah.
of the Greek alphabet. My as I've mentioned before on this podcast and to you, as you know already, my wife is in healthcare. She's fantastic, and she has to deal with the visceral misery of it on a day-to-day basis. You are looking at it from a 10,000-foot view. If we could hop in that metaphorical helicopter. Actually, let's just approach this from a research thing, because that tends to be your strength. Why is our vaccination rate, according to your research, so puny in this city?
Well, it's that's a good question. I wish I knew the full answer to that, because I think that would help us kind of best communicate and reach people. I think if you look and see the vaccination rates across Missouri overall, but particularly Southwest Missouri, are very low. Springfield is actually much higher than the rest of the region, but viruses don't respect political boundaries, and so when we're dealing with things like the Delta spike that we're dealing with now, it's not a city by city thing. It's you live in a region and you're affected by everyone else's decisions within that broader region. And I think that, I think that for a lot of times talking to people comes down to distrust. It comes down to politics, which is extremely unfortunate, because this isn't a political issue. It's a medical issue. It's a scientific issue, and politics shouldn't kind of enter into it. But you do across the country see a very high level of correlation between partisan voting and the rates of vaccination. And there's no reason for that. There should be no reason for that. But unfortunately, it has become political. And so I think it's for people having to hear, maybe getting misinformation, viewing it as a political issue, and really needing to hear from somebody who is a trusted individual for them to maybe go to talk to a doctor or go find out about the science behind the vaccine.
Is it also true that the numbers are showing, so nationally, it breaks down by age as well? And looking at nationally, over 60 seems to be a higher rate of vaccination.
Yes.
And then there's this more troubling group of younger people who kind of have a belief that they are healthy enough that it's not going to affect them, or if they get it, it's not going to cause them too much problems anyways. Are we seeing that kind of same breakdown here? Yes. Outside of ideology, that we still have higher rates above a certain age limit?
Absolutely. If you look at the vaccine rates locally and within our region by age group, it is much higher among those who are over 60. And I do think part of that is that, in the earlier stages of the pandemic, those are the age groups that were most effective, or the age groups that were most vulnerable. And what we've seen under Delta here and other places that are starting to be affected by it is that the average age of those hospitalized is dramatically lower than it was before. And a big part of that is the fact that those over 60, I think, maybe had more of a sense of urgency about getting the vaccine based on prior experiences. They are highly vaccinated. In many cases, over 80% or 90% of individuals in that age group are vaccinated. They're not being affected as much by the Delta variant. Younger individuals who were not affected as much before are the ones who tend to be ending up in the hospital now. And so I think for a lot of people in those younger age groups, it's not even so much opposition to the vaccine. It's maybe just a sense that this is not as important for me as it is for others, which is not really true now with the Delta variant.
I'm pretty sure the Venn diagram between the people who listen to this podcast and people who are vaccinated is a circle. But in the off chance that, and I just want to do a shout out for Jared and I, in the off chance anybody listening to this is, we'll call it vaccine curious, not vaccinated yet, go back to our second episode. We had Vivian Elder on, Dr. Elder, and she talked specifically about what vaccines are and how they work. We really encourage you. Matt, last question for me, at least on this issue, because we've got a million more. But last question from me. People are very aware of national politics, state politics, local politics, maybe not so much. What can the city council do during a pandemic like this? How much can you guys move the needle?
We, there was a lot that we were able to do over the initial kind of year of the pandemic. In our state and in many other states like ours, those decisions tended to be left to a local level. And again, that's something that none of us are on there because we anticipated a pandemic. We're in unpaid volunteer positions because we care about the community, and we have to be able to we have to use expertise in situations like this because you can't be an expert on every possible circumstance you can face, and we're fortunate to have many great local experts. So we have the power to have the stay-at-home order, which we issued and approved early in the pandemic, and that was really based on that scientific guidance and being able to have time to figure out how do we best address this and how do we best protect people. And based on what we learned during those earlier experiences, we were able to implement things like the mask mandate and continued targeted occupancy restrictions to be able to balance, making sure that people were still able to get out and do things they needed to do while ensuring that they were doing so as safely as possible. And that's something, if we had known at the very beginning, things that we know now, like the fact that masks work as a mitigation step, the fact that certain settings and certain gatherings are more risky than others. We could have just started with those, but nobody knew those at the time. You can only know them by learning and by collecting the evidence and having experts do their research. And so our approach kind of throughout was, we're going to have to make the decisions for our region, and we're going to make them based on that expert guidance and based on the best science, understanding that will evolve and our policy evolves as well. We don't have as much authority now. You had action taken at the state level to pretty severely restrict in this past session what local governments can do to respond to public health issues, and so we are in a different situation now than we were before, but we are still working very closely with the health department. That's a partnership between the city and the county to try to make sure that we are supporting the best we can and still following those expert policy recommendations to the extent that we're able to.
So I really I listened or watched on YouTube the masking debates and a few other council sessions, and I really appreciated your measured responses, your continued respectfulness that you still showed in the face of sometimes vitriol that was misdirected. And so, as a research scientist, as someone that uses data that's trained and reflects on measured metrics, after those experiences, what did you learn? What did you take away from that? Because I like the fact that you were still positive when he asked you earlier, like, what's your takeaway? Well, it's, in that case, in terms of those very heated debates at times and that really challenging position, what did you take away from that?
That's a great question. I think it's, it is not, it's not easy to be in the position where you're kind of having vitriol or threats, and we had threats at times regularly throughout that kind of directed at us. That's not something to get that's easy to get used to. I've always been of the belief that whatever our specific kind of political opinions, that we share common goals, and that if we can sit down and talk through them and look at the evidence, we may still not agree on the path to get there, but we're all trying to get to the same place. There were times throughout that debate where I don't know that we were all kind of trying to get to the same place, and that's a more difficult situation to deal with. And so I think what you still have to do throughout that is still make sure that you're treating everyone with respect, still make sure that you're listening to what everyone says and drawing out what's constructive from it. But you also can't, you can't let threats, or you can't let kind of the most vitriolic rhetoric drown out the actual evidence when you're still making the decision. So for me, as much of a test as it was, it still reaffirmed to me the belief that it's important to listen to everyone. It's important to make decisions based on the evidence and make decisions based on the best interests of the community, no matter what that means for me individually as a person.
So you talked about what kind of the work you do as Chief Research Officer. What does the governmental affairs officer side look like in your job?
A lot of it is kind of the same sort of information sharing, just with different audiences or external audiences. When we're working with the state or the federal government on projects where we're seeking resources. We worked on the Plaster Advanced Manufacturing Center, for example. It's providing that information of, here's the research we've done to show that there's the market demand for this, both regionally and across the state. Here are the specific kind of job projections associated with the programs that we're going to provide there. Here is the return on investment for students, for the community, for the state, or for other stakeholders that would be putting money into those and into those projects, and so it's making sure that when you have policymakers, making decisions about OTC, that they have the best possible information to know what we do and know the value of what we do when they're making those decisions, and I think that that's one of the that's what I enjoy is in my second unpaid volunteer job, I do get to sit up and kind of make decisions, but I'm still taking the same approach of making it based on evidence. And what I enjoy doing is kind of providing that information to people and letting them, making sure that they're the ones making the decision, but I can give them the evidence and answer their questions.
You got to get more paid jobs, Matt. You keep gravitating towards these unpaid volunteer jobs.
Yeah, that's the nice thing is that we could we could give ourselves 100% raise and not affect the budget and unpaid jobs. So
that's right.
You can set whatever percent level you want. Doesn't matter as far as the actual amount.
So here's a real niche question for you. What is your favorite representational diagram for analysis, and what's your favorite representational diagram for communicating information?
That is a very good but very niche question.
I'll just be sitting over here while you two talk.
I don't know, and this is probably kind of a cop-out answer, but I don't think I have a universal favorite, because I think it depends on the context of the data, and it depends on the context of the question, and it depends on the audience as well. I think that if you are building data visualizations, if I'm building data visualizations based on what I like or what most resonates with me, that's a great kind of personal activity. It doesn't work so well once it leaves my desk, and if it doesn't leave my desk, then it's kind of a pointless activity. So I like to get to know the audience that I'm working with, and what is it how can I present it in a way that's most useful to them, and that takes any number of different forms. I like a lot of the more kind of advanced visualizations. I do most of my work in Microsoft Power BI, and they're good about, and their custom visualization store having a lot of the advanced stuff, Sankey's and others, and I like to play around with those. But a lot of times, the simple pie graph or bar graph or area graph, that tends to be what resonates with people the most, rather than trying to do something more advanced, I find.
I just feel like you asked that question because you have an answer.
I am curious on your answer.
Boy. For communicating information, I really enjoy like pictographs.
Yeah.
Like more, kind of narrative based. And those are really fun to build, right? For analysis, I'm old school physics, so I think I'm gonna have to go with a line graph, right? That's really just 2 and 3 dimensional analysis. And then working with statistical analysis within that just tells you so much information.
It's very tried and true.
Let's broaden our scope a little bit here with the next question, though. Gumby versus Mr. Ed, battle to the death. Who wins?
A battle to the death between Gumby and Mr. Ed.
And why? That's the most important part.
Can Gumby be harmed? I mean, I feel like his whole thing is that he is elastic and seems to be able to survive any number of different things. I don't know that he would be able to. Sir, you are preaching
to the choir here, because I have had the same. Yeah.
I mean, I don't think he would be able to do anything to Mr. Ed besides tire him out. But I don't feel like Gumby's is possible. I don't feel like it's possible to defeat Gumby. So I guess by default, I would choose Gumby as the
Dr.
winner.
Elder had thought of the Eddie Murphy Gumby, in which case, I don't know, maybe I give the edge to the horse in that circumstance. But yeah, I think the claymation Gumby, that guy is indestructible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you are Gumby. I'm guessing you are Mr. Ed.
I'm pretty sure Jared
I've never answered the question.
Has never weighed in.
And I'm not going to.
Yeah.
That takes away from my objectivity as the asker of the question, right? And like I said, to me, it's not about the answer. I love people's explanations of it, and I've asked that question for a decade now.
Matt's question immediately was, "Well, can he be murdered?"
Yeah, so and I really get to know people that way, because we've already heard 4 different people respond differently, and Andrew argue with them. Right, like
hey, if I'm going into fighting to death, I'm taking Mr. Simpson and his. Well, let's examine this. First of all, can we murder this person?
The real problem though is it's dated. So I need a.
Yeah, we had Oganyemi on before you, and he's a young guy. He had no idea who either one of those characters were.
Yeah, I don't think either of those are probably. I've thought about making Mr. Ed jokes on Twitter before, and I realized that probably the audience is not
just
going to.
Oh
my goodness, my Lord of the Rings stuff doesn't work in in classrooms anymore. Lord of the Rings. And that was, I know it was like turn of the century, but still, Lord of the Rings stuff wasn't.
That for me was kind of the turning point when I made a Simpsons reference in class one time, and the class didn't get it, and
which is a shame because that is on now. That's
it's on now.
That's just them not knowing their pop culture. That's not on you, sir.
Always respect a good joke and trust your audience to find it, right? Let them do the work.
Yeah.
So,
see, I like layering my puns to where maybe you've got a deeper level that the people that get the inside reference will appreciate, but then you've also got kind of a base level that even if you don't get the nested reference, at least there's something there for the general audience.
My favorite comics just take it until there's only one person in the back of the room laughing, and that I respect that. So, Andrew, we brought our guest on today to talk about bring us back here,
yes.
Get us on track again.
Well, it's such a fortunate time for you and I to work at a community college because, again, community college is probably, correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, I don't think it's, at least in my adult lifetime, has ever got the amount of oxygen that it's getting right now in public discourse. Before we get into anything else, Matt, let's walk through this together. Start us off, sir. What role... We are not talking about OTC. We're talking about community colleges in America. What role do community colleges play in America that, let's say, a regular college, regular is the wrong word to use, state college, university, what would you say?
4 year. Yeah.
There you go.
Or to more traditional 4 years. Yeah, it's a dual role, and I think it's they're distinct but complementary. And that dual role is offering terminal degrees in areas that require something less than a four-year degree, and preparing students directly to go into quality employment. And that has historically been a role that was not always served by community colleges, was served by maybe very specific trade schools or apprenticeship programs, or similar kind of training programs that were outside of the traditional higher education setting. Where community colleges kind of came in was combining that role with also the role of accessible higher education, whether you're going that trade route or whether you're preparing to go to a 4-year university, because many people under the traditional model were simply kind of priced out of being able to pursue a bachelor's degree. And so even if the career you wanted to go into was something that required an advanced degree, that maybe wasn't an option for you. And so community colleges, I think, at their core it's that accessibility focus, and then allowing students to. It's not just a trade school, but it has those trades and it has the paths that allow you to transfer on. And typically, at OTC and at many what we find, and this is true of many others as well, students that start at community college perform as well, if not better, than students that start at a 4-year once they transfer.
That's true, sir.
That is true for our. We track our graduates who go on to Missouri State, and students who start with us and get an associate's degree. If you follow them through to graduation at Missouri State in that 4 or 6 year time frame, they are graduating at rates that are equal to, if not higher, than students that start at Missouri State.
So I am a hypothetical student. I'm kind of kicking it around. OTC sounds fine. So I end up going to OTC. I'm really excited, or I'm really nervous, or whatever. But one thing I need to do is I need to get my finances in order. Now, what percentage, we have a high percentage. I read this in an article recently. We have a high percentage of students that actually get grants to come here, right? They're not paying traditional tuition. What's the percentage? Do we know?
So it's typically about 60% of our students are receiving some form of financial aid.
Mm-hmm.
That can be from the federal government. Pell is the largest source of financial aid for students. There's some other federal
I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is very important for this conversation. In a nutshell, what is a Pell Grant in a nutshell?
So a Pell Grant is based on your income level or your family's income level if you're a dependent. It's a determination made on FAFSA and your expected family contribution, and it's a sliding scale based on your expected family contribution of what you can get up to full Pell. And one of the really nice things about Pell is that it can cover tuition, and full Pell certainly covers the full cost of tuition at OTC. But if you're going to OTC, the full Pell amount is beyond what you're paying in tuition, and that still goes to the student. So it provides support not only for paying for the direct costs of attending college, but also paying for the costs that you incur just as someone who's is living while doing anything. So students are able to use some of that money for things like living expenses and textbooks and other costs that are associated with attending college.
So where is this drumbeat coming from? We currently have a president who is kicking around and seriously pushing the idea of tuition-free community college. Is tuition, as regards to community college, again, not OTC, just community colleges on a whole, is it creating barriers or something? What is the problem with having a tuition?
It can create barriers. You do have many of those programs like Pell, in our state we have A+, that goes beyond certain income groups and allows anyone who meets certain criteria in high school to get tuition-free years of community college. Kind of similar concept to what we're talking about on the federal scale. The benefit there is, for middle-class families, this may be one of the only financial aid programs that they kind of have access to, and so it's a real benefit for middle-class students. I think that to me the discussion is maybe it's about barriers, but it's also about kind of expectations. So I think if you look at a historical parallel, high school, secondary school did not used to be part of the standard progression. Up until really the early to mid 20th century, high school at the time was like post-secondary is now. It was something that some people chose to move on to, but it was not expected that you finish 8th grade, you're moving on. It was, I'm going to decide to go to high school or I'm going to go to work. And it was a major reform to start investing in and building out public high schools and making that freely available as part of our public education system and encouraging attendance. And I think it was in the 1950s when they finally kind of reached 80% of school children across the country began attending high school based on those reforms, and it's gone up since then. But it kind of moved the ending barrier where education moved from being an expected to voluntary and choice that people made. And you see now it varies from high school to high school, but in Missouri, we still have a large percentage of students who, once they graduate from high school, are not attending post-secondary education. And some of that is financial barriers. Some of that is personal choices. Some of it are family expectations. There's a range of factors that go into those rates. But we don't have that kind of high level of post-secondary attendance that you see in some states or you see in some other countries. And so to me, this is maybe akin to that process with high schools back in the 20th century of, do we want to adjust the expectations? Do we want to say that based on the needs of today's workforce that, we recognize that not everybody needs a bachelor's degree or a graduate degree, but everybody should probably have at least a certificate or an associate's degree or some level of post-secondary training.
It's interesting you mentioned that. Obviously, probably the number one candidate that's talking about making all college free would be Bernie Sanders. Ran for president a couple times, didn't work out for him. But he, in that push, which whatever your opinion on that, so be it, but he did make an interesting point. He did say that according to, and you would speak to this directly, according to some analysis, a college degree, or I guess I should say a high school degree a couple generations back is now the equivalent of a college degree now. Have you seen similar research?
Yeah. If you look at the gap, the gap in earnings between those with just a high school degree and those with at least some college, that gap has grown and has changed from what it was before. It is there is more of the expectation of you are going to have a credential for these jobs that are the most well-paying jobs and to provide them the best benefits as well.
It seems to me that there's an interesting argument too to be said for this being about 2-year programs, and you talked about access, and so it's not strictly a 4-year liberal arts education. It's access to job training, to tech degrees, to trade, the kind of things that is scaling up from what we might have seen after the Industrial Revolution, where there was more of a apprenticeship model,
Right.
And so it's not just about we need more philosophy professors, right? It's about not only access for people and their advancements of their families, but a need that the country has for certain positions to be filled with well-trained individuals.
Exactly, and I think manufacturing is a great industry example of that. We still, I think, have stereotypes about what manufacturing plants look like as a workplace, and but if you go into manufacturing settings, there's a lot of technology involved. Oftentimes there's some programming involved. There's certainly networking between the machines that you're working with, and so it does require those skills to be able to work in a manufacturing setting. And so when you have jobs that maybe previously could have been done with a high school diploma, that are moved now to where you require that level of skills and training prior to getting the job, that's where kind of the needle shifts as far as that starting salary, and that's where the income gap builds between high school graduates and those with some college and the ability to access those technical training programs.
Cards on the table. Our bias clearly is that people need to get a post-secondary degree. At least that's my bias. But you and I went to a conference in San Antonio maybe a couple years back, and they brought up an anecdote, one of these old arguments made against college since time immemorial. It was like, I don't know why you need to waste a couple years. You can trot right into a welding degree straight out of high school. I'm sorry, welding career straight out of high school, and you're good to go. That's not applicable. You got to get that welding certificate now, which of course OTC
right
is baller in. Like we're that's one of our best programs here.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. That is another great example, and that's also a great example of how colleges need to adjust to the students that we're serving, because that is something that students that are going into those welding careers, they tend to want to get right into the careers. I would want to get right. Looking at the salaries that welders make, I'd want to as well. And so the fact that we've developed the 20-week welding program where it's condensed, you can complete your certificate, get your industry recognized credential and licensure within that 20-week period, and then you're able to go to work. We have to also be flexible in recognizing that just as students may be coming with different interests as far as what gets them to their career, they also may be coming with different time frame expectations, and that we have to be flexible to recognize that for some of them it's 2 years, for some of them it's 20 weeks, and how can we best deliver them the training they need within the time frame that works for them.
Great time hanging out in San Antonio with Matt anyways, because Matt is the expert at, we got 45 minutes to kill. Matt's like, hold on, starts fiddling around on his phone, and he was like, here's this restaurant we go to. It's like right next to the river. The food's fantastic. We have mariachi bands coming up offering us music, and Matt is the perfect person to hang out with if you've got 45 minutes. I'm sure you're great for extended periods of time, but if you got 45 minutes to burn, find Matt. He's doing something pretty great.
That's why they have the great river walk too.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to gloss over your fantastic advertising pitch there that our OTC welding program, we're baller.
Yes, that's right. I need to get in touch with Sarah Bargo.
Sure.
I will be the face of the baller campaign for our welding program. So when we talk about tuition, one thing I did not even think about until Jared and I were actually fortunate enough to have a sit down not that long ago with Dr. Higdon, which maybe we should bring him on one of these days. But he had mentioned something I hadn't figured, was that different community colleges have different dependence on tuitions. Like here in OTC, relatively low dependence compared to other community colleges, right?
So as far as
our percentage, like we get a ton of local taxation. We get some state, some federal, and as a result, the tuition we depend on. Like some colleges, like 80% of their income is
No, our tuition dependence is actually the higher end.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So community colleges really should be kind of a three-tiered stool. It should be about a third local, a third state, a third from tuition. We have at OTC the lowest level of state funding per student of any college in Missouri, college or university in Missouri, and we also have the lowest tax levy of any college in Missouri. We depend. It varies as far as the specific number, but it's typically between 65 and 70% of our operating revenue is coming from tuition. So we are more dependent on tuition than any others.
I'd like to remind listeners that mine and Andrew comments are our own and not representational of OTC.
That's right, correct. And on top of that, if I am the federal government pushing a tuition-free program, do I knock on OTC's door? I say, how much tuition do you guys bring in? And I just give the school the money so that they don't need to charge tuition from, like, how does it work? You know the politics better than we do. How would this program work? And I know there are actually several different plans. I would encourage you to stay away from the plans that have no chance. What's the mainstream plan here?
I think that the most mainstream plan is something that ties the money to individual students rather than kind of group allocations to institutions. Because there is so much variance in how many students you may get from year to year. There's variance in the level to which each individual student's attending. You have some community colleges where the majority of their students are full-time. You have some where the majority are part-time. You have some where it shifts. It moves around with OTC depending on what's going on with the economy and the job market around us. And so it would be hard, I think, to have institutional allocations that would work. So I think most of the plans that I've seen and the plans that you've seen succeed at the state level, like the A+ program, are ones where you have amounts tied to the student that are dependent on the institutional tuition, but they have a cap usually. So you can't, we can't say, well, you're coming in on the tuition program, we're going to charge you twice. Wouldn't be ethical, wouldn't be fair, and program would break down pretty quickly if you did that.
I'm not entirely sure how much I understand the cap. Are you suggesting that even under this universal tuition plan, you could still have to pay tuition if you exceed the cap?
If you're attending an institution that exceeds the cap. Now, the thing is that normally if you set that cap, like in Missouri, the A+ cap is based on the tuition rate charged by State Tech College, which has the highest tuition rate among the kind of 2-year sector. And so, an institution could choose to raise their tuition above that cap, but realistically, they're not going to do so because, then you would have A+ students who would come and find that the A+ is not going to cover their full cost of tuition. That's not meeting the A+ promise to them. It's not really a responsible decision on the part of the institution. And so in practice, if you set a cap, institutions will follow it. That's more difficult to do on a national level. That's one of the things, that's one of the reasons you see a lot of people argue kind of for the state.
Why is that? Why is it more difficult?
Because there is a lot more variance in what institutions charge. There's a lot more variance in cost of living and other operating costs that are determined by your kind of surrounding community. And so, setting a cap, a tuition cap that works for an institution in New York City and works for an institution in the Ozarks is a difficult thing to do. If you set it based on the New York rate, that's much higher than we charge. And if you set it based on our rate, then places in New York City and others like that are going to be priced out of being able to participate.
So in this extended A+ model, are there performance requirements for the students, and is there a certain number of courses that can be taken per semester?
If many of them do have those requirements, and that's there's a balance there, I think, between wanting to make sure if we're putting money into this, we want to make sure that there's some kind of accountability on the part of the student receiving the money. On the other hand, I think a lot of times programs are built with those accountability layers where maybe the intent of the program was to provide access, but we've layered on so much on the part of the student that we kind of take away the benefits of the access. And so, I would say as we're looking at these things, a lot of times you're trying to strike a balance between that. We want to make sure that the money is being well used while not overly burdening the student and making it so it doesn't help them benefit.
The student should be taking an exam or taking a class or reading a chapter thinking, I really want to absorb this information so I can be the best me I can be.
Right.
Not, oh my goodness, if I screw this up, I'm going to lose my funding.
Right. And one of the other things there is that, a lot of the metrics that we look at in higher education are based on the traditional 4-year model. The gold standard by which a lot of these programs are evaluated is the IPEDS 150% of normal time graduation rate, which says, all right, so you start in a fall semester as a first time full-time degree seeking student. We're going to follow you at 150% of the time we'd expect you to take to complete your degree. Do you graduate? And then for community colleges, we're also allowed to report, do you transfer on, and count that as a success in the completion rate. But if we're talking about like some of these programs that are preparing students with skills for employment, maybe you take a class in welding and you get the skills from that class to get a job. So I complete my class, I go out, I get a job, I get the job I want, I'm making good money. But on a graduation rate metric, I'm counted as a failure because I didn't graduate. And so, that's, I think, also one of the limitations of some of those accountability measures that we use is that they're based on the 4-year models, and they're based on something that works well for a traditional university, but doesn't work as well for a community college where the majority of our students don't come in through that traditional first-time full-time entry point. And so they're not even counted in the metric to begin with. And then a lot of the successful outcomes that we can get students to in terms of employment are not counted as successful outcomes on the other end. So that's something else that I think it's important to keep in mind when designing these metrics, especially for free community college, is making sure they are tailored to the goals of students who are attending community college and not the goals of students that were attending Harvard in the 1930s.
We again, Jared and I were very fortunate to have a sit down with Dr. Higdon where this issue came up. And he said that tuition-free community college, and I'm directly quoting here, could be the best thing for community colleges in America, and it can be the worst thing for community colleges in America, depending on the specifics. Do you concur? Do you come somewhere down in that spectrum? It's the entire spectrum. So do you come down somewhere in that spectrum?
That's the entire. Well, I think you would have to come down somewhere within the entire spectrum. But yeah, I concur. I think that it's something that, obviously, with the bias we've acknowledged, we think people should attend post-secondary institutions. There's a lot of value in setting that expectation. But as far as how that is actually implemented, there are a lot of road mines in the implementation. I think in the potential implementation. So, it is something that I think he said it well. It could be the best thing ever for us. It could be the worst thing ever for us in terms of the impact on us, all depending on how something like that would be structured and implemented.
Is there any way to make peace with 4-year colleges if something like this happens? There's always this kind of uneasy alliance between community colleges and the 4-year institutions, because if we become tuition free at community colleges specifically, then 4-year colleges, those first couple of years, they're loading up students on liberal arts. A lot of students are going to start coming to community colleges instead and then transferring later. Is there any way to kind of square that circle so that 4-year institutions aren't robbed is the wrong word, but all of a sudden they don't have the student body that they used to have for those first 2 years?
I think it's possible. I think we've seen that in Missouri with the A+ program. Other states that have since implemented it, like Tennessee with their Tennessee Promise program. I think that they still have good working relationships between their colleges and universities, and you haven't seen the universities fall off the map in terms of enrollment. I think that the doing it on a national level, and if it did kind of accomplish that shift of it's not really K-12 anymore. It's K-14. I think that certainly presents new new challenges in terms of the relationships between colleges and universities, but they are not challenges I think that couldn't be overcome.
Where do I want to go with that? Well, so let me just ask you that. You have studied a ton of student behavior at OTC. So your best projection, if we issue some sort of tuition-free community college plan, and just for full disclosure, just for full education purposes, for anybody that's listening and is unfamiliar with the plans in front of Congress right now, almost all of them include an expansion of Pell, a Pell that is more generous, and also the amount of time. What is the current time? 2 years, 4 years? How long do you have Pell access?
It's again, it depends on kind of the student's circumstances, but typically it's about that kind of 2 to 3 year period.
So if we enact any of these mainstream plans that we've kind of been bandying about, should we expect a tidal wave of new community college students? Will our student body expand dramatically?
I think that the hope would be that you would see expansion, and this goes back to the college and university relationship point, that you would see expansion out of the students from high school that are not currently attending college, and not so much a shift from students that were previously attending universities to college, but a true new addition of students to the higher ed world. And if you look at what's happened in states that have implemented these sorts of programs, you have seen that sort of significant increase in post-secondary attendance. One thing that kind of balances that out, though, for us and for many states right now, if you look at population trends, is that the number of traditional graduates is low in many areas right now, and is going to probably continue to get lower. And so we may get a higher share of graduates attending based on this, but that may still translate into a lower number of students based on the fact that there's just not as many students leaving high school. And so the other component of this, and something that I think would need to be included for this plan to be successful, is that there are a lot of adults who are maybe out of high school for a couple of years or more, who are underemployed or unemployed, more often underemployed kind of now, and would like to get better jobs, who could benefit from getting a trades degree or from getting an associate's degree that leads them to a 4-year. And I think a successful program has to have a path for those individuals as well, and has to promote to those individuals as well. That is where you could see the tidal swell of enrollment. If you look at OTC, for example, we've tended to be pretty steady over the past several years when you've seen huge declines for a variety of reasons in the community college sector. But if you look at our enrollment back to 2011, when we were kind of at our peak during the recession at the time, we are down about 4,000 students in the over 25 age group. We were in that point. We have made up for a lot of that on getting a higher percent of high school graduates enrolling with us. But that's a finite number that we're working with, and so you can only increase kind of so much with the higher yield rates. And if we tomorrow had those 4,000 students that were with us during the height of the recession and the adult population come back, and I think that something near that could be a realistic number if you have a program that is promoted to adults. That overnight would be almost a 40% kind of increase for us. Now, that's probably not sustainable to do overnight, but that would be where you could see those dramatic increases.
So let's just take a moment to appreciate what we are doing for a living. Matt, your one job you're actually getting paid for. We are all working at a community college. There is I don't know the exact wording of the American dream, but it's like you can start anywhere, and if you work hard and play by the rules, you can do better for yourself than you started off, and the next generation after you can build from that. That's the American dream. And what we've learned over and over again, and you would actually know figures behind this, maybe, I don't want to put you on the spot, is that the ladder you need is education. Yeah. And nowadays, as we've talked about before, it's increasingly becoming post-secondary education.
Right.
And so we all play a role in that. And so this offers intriguing promise if it's done right, cutting back to Dr. Higdon's remarks, if it's done right, if it's executed properly. But is that your understanding as well? Is that the best ladder is education, specifically post-secondary education?
It absolutely is, and we can put that into monetary terms for students. We did work with a national firm to do an economic impact study. That so that for every dollar in their time and their money and all the opportunity cost lost by attending, students are getting back about $6, which is a huge return on investment. And then you have the lifetime of earnings kind of past that. So there's the monetary return on investment. But to me, that what drives home the impact the most is that when you look at graduation ceremonies for programs like nursing, and you see individuals there with their family, for whom they are statistically, this is true for a lot of our students, they are the first person in their family to graduate from college. They're likely the first person in their family to get a job with benefits that is well paying, and you see that family, and you know not only the economic impact it has on that individual graduate, but the lasting impact that's going to have on their kids and their kids and down the line, and for our community in general. That is the best ladder, and the more people we can help onto that first rung of the ladder, the better we're all going to be.
And specifically, I'm an advocate for community college and for OTC. I'm actually a product of it. It really is transformational. I was a first generation college student. I was born in Cox North. I'm from this area. OTC gave me access to an undergraduate degree at a 4-year university. Then it gave me access to graduate school. And why I'm back here and such an advocate for it is I've seen that, right? I've seen that return, not only in a monetary investment, but in just access to the world, to a worldview, and to the ability to pass on those opportunities. Right. And so it's not just being an advocate for higher education, but being an advocate for local community. And I think that's one of the perks, or one of the things that community college really offers to 4-year universities rather than threaten them is to provide more access to people within their own community who stay in their community.
Thank you for saying that. So well said, Jared, and Matt as well. We're not advocating, clearly the bias of the people, at least you and I, the bias is get as many students to college and specifically community college as possible, not just because it's good to have them around, although clearly we love having them around. Most importantly, as you said, it's access to make their community a better place. Yeah.
Well, we cannot thank you enough. We've learned a lot. Everything from kind of a up close look at what's happening currently in our region as it pertains to COVID, a little bit better understanding of how politics in Springfield function, a ton of information about the possibilities of expanding access to higher education. And frankly, I don't know about you, Andrew. I didn't know that.
I did not know that.
Now you do.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.